We are Rogue Media Sports.
It is the Doomsday podcast. And boy, Ed, too often lately, the name takes on kind of a double meaning. Obviously, an ode to those old great Cowboys defenses with the Manster, Harvey, Ed Too Tall Jones, and the whole gang. But the news pops the other night, and Ed, people have been, hey, when's the Doomsday? When's the Doomsday? And you put out a tease. We're going to have one after the news conference. So Ed and I have just rushed back to our respective studios from the Cowboys news conference, and it was pretty well attended. All the Cowboys people were there, the Jones family, the Schottenheimer family, and we will get into kind of what we heard today, anything that might be hopeful to you, things that are very concerning. I would say Jerry was not real long on great detail or great answers today. It was very leaning in Ed story time and that kind of thing, which Jerry can certainly do from time to time. And I just wanted to start off by kind of getting your just that first initial Friday night at whatever time it was, 8:30 or so, 8 o'clock or 8:30, the Friday news dump. Here it comes, and everybody's firing it out there. I saw your report. Of course, I retweeted that. I made that kind of my first retweet, but everybody's firing on this thing. Brian Schottenheimer. It's going to become official, and then about 20 minutes later, the Cowboys put the official post out there. And we couldn't be surprised because we kept hearing it. But even with that, it's still, it's like when you think about other people being hired and who they could have interviewed and who they did interview and who they could have waited on when we were watching Kellen coach the Eagles, play call the Eagles to the Super Bowl. And of course, this happened before that. And what was your just gut reaction? Because you jumped into action and started, reporting news about the possible defensive coordinator and all that. But when it finally came to fruition, did it kind of seem surreal? Did it seem weird to you? What were your just initial feelings when you got the news or when you made the news?
Well, it was odd to me from the standpoint of when we last left Jerry Jones and Mike McCarthy following, that final loss of the season to the Washington Commanders on the final play of the game. And we knew they were going to go into this, deliberation about the future and whether McCarthy and his staff was going to return after just finishing their contracts. I think we all had the sense that in all likelihood, they were entering these meetings expecting to work something out and continue their partnership. And that's not what happened after their 5 days of meeting. And then, so to me, it was like announcing that Brian Schottenheimer was going to become the first time head coach in a 25-year career as an NFL assistant under the circumstances. It was like they finished the season at 7-10. Jerry goes to the coach's locker room, opens the door, and says, "Hey, we're making a change. You're all fired. Well, except for you, Schotty. You're the new head coach." That's kind of how it struck me. And, to put this into context, it's, the Cowboys are the only team in the current hiring cycle who are promoting an assistant coach to the position of head coach. Brian Schottenheimer, as I said, he's been an NFL coach and assistant for 25 years, been employed by 9 different teams, and now becomes a head coach for the first time at age 51. And there's definitely seems to be some strange logic involved in continuing with the offensive system Mike McCarthy installed for Dak Prescott, but proceeding without McCarthy while promoting his non-play calling offensive coordinator into that role. It's weird. And like you said, the attention-obsessed Cowboys bury the hiring until 9 p.m. on a Friday night. I think that sort of tells us that Jerry knew this was not going to be well received. And my sense is the fan base is either irate or apathetic in equal numbers, and there's nothing in between. And the last thing I wanted to say about this is the last time somebody hired a 50-year-old coach with no NFL head coaching experience and they won a Super Bowl, that team and that coach, Barry Switzer with the Cowboys 30 years ago.
So you're saying
I'm saying there's a chance.
there is a chance the Cowboys last Super Bowl.
But I did think that people who were outraged, I think they're going to have a different impression. They might still be infuriated at Jerry and Steven for the process. But I knew Brian Schottenheimer because we talked to him every week. Mondays following games, the head coach speaks, and then each of the coordinators speaks. And Brian Schottenheimer is very engaging. He gives a lot of detail. He's very anecdotal in his answers. So I thought people would eventually like him when they saw him. And then, you take into account how many different people he's worked for, how many different systems and places he's been in, and, the heritage of his father, Marty Schottenheimer, being one of the, he's not been elected to the Hall of Fame. And when I was at training camp a few years ago, talked to Brian about his father's influence on him and so forth. But, it was like Steven said after the press conference today, hey, this is a guy who grew up in this sport. And there's something of value to that. It's like Sean McVay grew up in the sport. His grandfather was, John McVay, who was the general manager of the 49ers back when the Cowboys and 49ers were going at it every year to make it to the Super Bowl. And it's not unlike, in their minds, Kyle Shanahan, coaching for his father, Mike, all those years, and then taking over himself and proving, himself to be quite capable. And so that's their expectation for Brian Schottenheimer as he becomes the 10th head coach in Cowboys history.
Yeah, and I kind of like, he alluded to a time today, and he wasn't bragging about it, but he was sort of, it is funny to think that at 51, the Cowboys didn't have to compete. And you're going to have some interesting things on this as a play caller. I want you to weigh in on that here in a minute. But as a head coaching candidate, like the last time he was a hot candidate was literally, and he even admitted it, when he was like 14 years ago. And if that had have happened, so he would have been 14 or 15 years ago, he would have been 35 years old probably. And I also thought it was interesting that he as a 20-year-old student at Florida where he was playing for Steve Spurrier, put down on a note card that he wanted to be the youngest NFL head coach ever. And he only missed that by about 20 years.
Well, to your point about that period when he was with the Jets, and they were having success. They went to consecutive AFC Championship games.
Yes.
Mark Sanchez was the quarterback, and Brian Schottenheimer was a play caller. And I spoke to Anthony Lynn, who coached on that staff with Schottenheimer, and he said, "Hey, back then, Brian Schottenheimer was the hot young offensive whiz kid who was attracting a lot of head coaching opportunities. He was, the modern day Ben Johnson at the time." And he said, a lot of us gave Schotty a hard time because he kept turning down opportunities because he said they weren't right. And they finally said, well, look, it's not going to be perfect. Like, you have to go make it work. You have to create success. You're not going to get a job for an NFL team as a head coach where everything's going great and everything's in place. You have to create circumstances for success.
I also love it. Yeah, go ahead.
And of course, Jerry and Steven think he's inherited the perfect situation here now that he's waited for it.
Yeah. And what's funny about you talking to Anthony Lynn, who, I became friends with many years ago when he was on Bill Parcells' staff. But, Anthony Lynn coaching in an NFC title game. Cliff Kingsbury, NFC title game. Kellen Moore, who they did interview actually on a virtual interview, NFC title game, going to the Super Bowl. So it is kind of funny, like how many, when you really thought about it, there was some really interesting and good, solid candidates out there. Cowboys just didn't really talk to any of them, except they did have the interview with Kellen Moore, which I kind of wanted to ask Jerry about. But Ed, after we'd had him for like an hour on the podium, and then 25 more minutes afterwards, at some point you got to walk away. And they finally came and got Jerry, and they're like, Jerry, so people are waiting on you. People are waiting on you upstairs. I think
Matt Eberflus has flown in to be the defensive coordinator. He's waiting in your office to interview for the defensive coordinator's job that he's expecting you to give to him. You might want to get to that.
he might have some other opportunities, so you might want to go talk to him. Okay, Ed, that was our longest intro ever, but I think it was worth it. Zach from Rogue Media Network, please play the music. All right, it is the Doomsday Podcast. Once again, Ed and I coming straight from Frisco. We were both, and I feel like I should share this with our audience. I had taken a seat right behind you and Kalishaw, two of my good friends, and was visiting with you guys before the press conference, and then like moments before it started, like as they're walking out there, suddenly Dak Prescott and one of his receivers, and there were like four players that
Brock Hoffman was one of them. So you better honor what they're asking you to do, or he'll forcefully remove you, as he has, so many defensive players.
Correct.
In recent years.
Yeah, and so at the very last minute, everybody sitting on our row, we were told, "Hey, the players are sitting here. Y'all need to move." So Ed, I know you guys were kind of laughing. I had to go stand over the side, and then finally I kind of peeled back around, found a seat in the back row. So it was. And
I think it's a little disrespectful that Kalishaw and I are seated in the third row when we've covered all of these. Like, we've covered every hire that Jerry has ever made, from Jimmy Johnson to Barry Switzer to Chan Gailey, Dave Campo. I mean, we've covered them all. Why are we sitting in the third row, and these relative newcomers are up front?
I think the people on the third and fourth rows were just kind of the wise people that just kind of let the kids do what they want to do up front, and we're just kind of back there overseeing things.
I will say I was happy for where I was positioned after all, because like you said, you got cleared out and Dak was sitting immediately behind me. And so I often heard his quiet reactions or affirmations to things that were being said up on the stage. And many times he anticipated what Schottenheimer was going to say and finished his sentence, or he would say, hey, amen, or yes, sir, or, those sorts of things. So it was pretty interesting to have that perspective, given that a lot of this hire is for Dak, as every hire has been since Dak has become the starting quarterback, and that's as it should be. We're talking about a quarterback who's the highest paid player in football, and he's entering his age 32 season, coming off of 2 injuries in 5 years, and the next coach, in this case Schottenheimer, has been hired as probably the last guy to try to have a chance to get Dak to deliver the Super Bowl they made him the quarterback for.
Yeah, you're right. And it has to be a little awkward when they keep talking about you. You're attending the news conference to show support, and like 5 of the questions are about you. How do you think you can get Dak to the next level? I mean, I think you're asking, well, Dak's been hurt, 2 of the last 5 years. And so Dak's just sitting there.
And what's your vision? What's your vision for the guy sitting right behind me?
Yes, he's sitting right behind you. And then if you didn't see the whole news conference, Jerry at some point, he'd already said something to Kalishaw because of, he recognized that he had been covering a lot of these things like Ed. And then at some point he said, Dak, would you reach up there and maybe put your hands around Ed Werder's neck? And so he playfully put his hands around on your shoulders there. So that was some good interaction. My only issue is that when you ask for the mic, I get it. WFAA, Channel 8, very respected news operation. I would like the Doomsday Podcast. I really would like that to be dropped.
As my affiliation?
Yeah. And I had people, by the way, offering me money to take the mic and say something about the Doomsday Podcast. And I'm like, I'm not going to do this it got up to $500. But anyway, I was happy to be there, visit, and hear everybody talk. Now, there's a lot to get into. I thought Jerry was in story time mode. I didn't really think, like, in that setting, and you only get one question with a microphone, it's kind of hard to ask follow-ups. And Jerry just kind of was in filibuster mode. It was like, Jerry, You've been doing this forever. You're the GM. I forget what Tim asked. Yeah, I think you would remember, Ed.
Tim's question was basically,
Yeah.
you've gone 29 years without getting to a championship game. That's the longest in the NFC, almost double the length of time any other franchise has experienced. And yet here you are as a general manager making your 7th head coaching hire. Sort of how do you justify the program in place? Because no other general manager gets to hire 7 head coaches without going to an NFC championship game. That was, I think, the intent and tone of Kalashaw's question. And, the interesting thing, I think when you finally hear from Jerry for the first time in 2 weeks after everything that's happened, is Jerry's first move is to react to whatever he views as the most relevant or the most irritating criticism that he's heard from the skeptics and from the media. And so he did that, and the way he did it was very early in the press conference. He took issue with the characterization that Jerry he's lost his wildcatter mentality. He's lost his willingness to take a chance. And he's no longer the risk-taking general manager that he was when they were winning Super Bowls. And he took issue with that immediately.
Yeah.
And I know that Schotty is no stranger to these guys. I know he's no stranger to this building. Now, I get my proverbial ass kicked over needing people in my comfort zone. Without this thing being about me in any way, if you don't think I can't operate out of my comfort zone, you're so wrong. It's unbelievable. This is as big a risk as you could take. As big a risk as you could take. No head coaching experience.
Ed, we've come a long way.
That's what's been irritating Jerry for 2 weeks.
That's right. We've come a long way in this podcast, Ed. We can just go straight to video. I love it. I love that. And Jerry, it was interesting the whole way through. But you're right. His first instinct is to, even in what you were talking about on that previous question, hey, you've done this now 29 years and you've been through all these coaches, and the one thing that hasn't changed is you. I think that's when he launched in, Ed, but I dream about it every night. I dream of getting to one of those, like where the Commanders and the Eagles. I dream about it, and it's like he wants credit for like how much he cares about it, or how much. Well, listen, every GM who's gotten fired recently probably cared a lot about what they were doing. Like, you don't get credit for being passionate. And even later, and I don't know if he said this on the mic, I'm getting it mixed up too, Ed, because he talked for 25 minutes after. But he was like saying something along the lines, it may have been when he was in front of everybody, how this was this was when he bought the team, right? It was like a passion move. It was a passion buy, and it was a bad business deal. And he loves talking about that and going back to that, because it's like I think it's gotten so bad, and he knows people are so upset with him that he constantly feels like he needs to go back to the Arkansas days, or go back to like how much he sacrificed and went through to be where he is. And the truth is, no fan cares about that. They just don't. Some of those stories are somewhat interesting, but the fans are just upset. I don't know if the fans were going to be that excited about anybody. Obviously, Ed, Dion would have offered the most exciting thing. Kellen, at least, is like really hot right now. Coming off, and I know it's, a lot of it, people say, well, he has Saquon, whatever. He's getting it done. He's the one calling all those plays to Saquon. At least he knows he's got a monster. They didn't do that with the Giants. They weren't winning like this with the Giants and using him like this. So I think Jerry, you said something interesting, Ed. It's like it's the only way he knows how to respond is to get back into, I've taken more risk, and this was another thing he said, in the past 5 years than any, combined for the rest of my career. And it's just, again, what does it get him? And even you were over there talking to Steven, because I was over with Jerry afterwards. And I think I read where Steven, again, got back into that thing where he said, we've been like the sixth best organization over the last however many years, 10 or 15 years. I mean, Ed, that's what they keep coming back to. And it's very infuriating to the fan base.
Well, he has taken a risk with Schottenheimer in the way that he says, in that nobody else is doing it this way in this hiring cycle, as I pointed out from the start. And if you look at the Cowboys' history of doing this sort of thing, they've done it 2 other times. They did it with Dave Campo with no head coaching experience and promoted him from within the staff, and he went 5-11 3 years in a row. And they did it with Jason Garrett, who had no head coaching experience except for the games he coached on an interim basis because Wade Phillips was fired in the middle of the season, the only coach Jerry's ever done that to. And Jason had that experience for the rest of the season. But in effect, Jerry has followed this process that he did with Schottenheimer 2 other times, and both times it failed horribly. Campo never got you to the playoffs in 3 years. Garrett coached for 10 years and won 2 playoff games. So between his last 2 hires, McCarthy and Garrett, he's dedicated 15 years to win 3 playoff games in 15 years. And, the fan base is upset with Jerry because Jerry has more control as the owner than any other general manager in football has to determining his fate as a general manager, right? He's not relying on somebody else to fund whatever it is, his vision. He's doing it himself. And, the funny thing to me is the Cowboys always lose their negotiations to their players, and they, in this case, got leveraged by Mike McCarthy, who let himself out. And it's just, I just don't understand, Jerry's talked so many times about, you wouldn't believe the size of the check that I would write to win me another Super Bowl. Right? Mm-hmm. That's what he says all the time. And I think he would do that. I have no doubt. He said, you wouldn't believe how many zeros will be on that check. But the problem is, that's not what's required to win a Super Bowl. What might be required to win a Super Bowl for the Cowboys is for somebody else to be the general manager and put the team together and make the coaching hires. And that Jerry won't even consider. He said it again today, that he's the best one equipped to make these kinds of decisions. And I was interested that Steven, and we're going to hear from him in a minute because you referenced it, he provided sort of the low moment of the press conference, I thought, today, with how he made reference to the 29-year drought the Cowboys have experienced here without going to a championship game. But he also basically said, we wanted, ultimately, as we talked to McCarthy and we evaluated our options for the next head coach, we kind of decided that we wanted to make a change. The change was necessary, but we wanted to do it carefully, right? So they're making a change. They're moving forward from the McCarthy offensive system, and Schottenheimer's going to call the plays. He was adamant about that. In fact, this was the most interesting thing I took from the press conference. And you can go into what Jerry's highlights were relative to Dion and Jason Witten speculation and all that. But Steven said that there was no world in which Mike McCarthy was coming back as the head coach and Brian Schottenheimer was going to stay in his role as offensive coordinator, not calling plays. That Schottenheimer had other opportunities outside the organization to call plays as an offensive coordinator, and he was prepared to leave the Cowboys if they weren't going to let him call the plays. And so part of this ultimate decision was, are we willing to move on from McCarthy and lose Schottenheimer? And ultimately, they decided they weren't willing to do that. And I asked Stephen Jones, well, what was the difference in your minds as you interviewed Kellen Moore, who obviously was the offensive coordinator here and play caller, and very successful, good relationship with Dak, offered a lot of the same things Schottenheimer did, and he really didn't want to get into the differences between the two, but I think it would be obvious to anybody that they feel like Schottenheimer's personality and leadership traits and experience make him more capable of commanding the room than Kellen Moore. And maybe they'll regret that if Kellen Moore goes and wins a Super Bowl, as he's one step away from doing that. If he becomes the one who's on the team that finally beats the Chiefs and denies Patrick Mahomes a record third consecutive Super Bowl. But that was, I think, the basis of that decision. And I don't know if you want to hear from Stephen Jones now and the remark he made that infuriated everyone, and we can react to that.
Obviously, we're also evaluating where it didn't go right, in terms of, this drought that people say we're in terms of a championship game or a Super Bowl.
And the key part of that, Ed, and so glad that our man Z was able to get that video together and get it up, was Stephen kind of belittling the fact that a drought, and after he said, the drought, he puts the quotation marks up with his, his two fingers.
Air quotes.
Air quotes. Yeah, he does the air quotes. And it was it minimized it. Like, I know everybody says that, whatever drought. Because back to what we were talking about, they think the hanging around the rim. I mean, Jerry cannot let that one go, by the way. We need to come back to that, but anyway, that was I think fans are justifiably upset about that because he kind of minimized the drought. He then mentions how long it's been. And then again, later with you guys over there, he's talking about, hey, we're 6 in the past however many years in number of wins. They want credit for all this stuff that, this team, again, used to be measured on championships. And now, Ed, if they even sniffed an NFC title game, I think there should be parades. I mean, they just seem always that right now they just seem so far from that. Even after some of those seasons, right, when they won 12 games and they go out and get embarrassed by Green Bay at home. And to your point from earlier, McCarthy, I mean, think about how McCarthy feels. So they have that talk, and whatever what was it was how many years McCarthy wanted, I don't know where the thing blew up. But what Jerry wanted to get out there today, and what Steven did, is we were ripping, even if Mike stayed, we were taking the play calling away from them or away from him. And think about that. He was so excited to have the play calling. That was going to be a so big deal. Oh, we're going to run the ball. We're going to blah blah blah. When Kellen left, he was talking so big. They were going to rip it away from him.
Yeah, all Kellen wanted to do was blow up scoreboards, and I want to run the football and protect our defense. Well, Kellen ran up the scoreboard yesterday, 55 points to send a championship game record, 55 points to send the Eagles to another Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm. He most certainly did. And but Ed, let's remember, perhaps does not command the room,
They've said that about other coaches too.
Yeah.
That was their concern. They said it about Matt LaFleur when he left the Titans and Mike Vrabel's staff to go to Green Bay, and all he did was become one of the winningest coaches in NFL history his first 3 or 4 seasons in the NFL. And I think he was the coach who eliminated the Cowboys last year on their own field.
Yeah. The other thing, you're right. The other thing that kept popping up was this idea of osmosis. I mean, if that's not an embarrassing deal. Now, listen, Brian Schottenheimer has done nothing wrong here. He's done a good job, and he's gotten promoted. It's not his fault. I don't think really the anger, and most people I don't think are putting the anger toward him.
Yeah, except for it's the search, right? It's you interviewed 4 people. 2 of them were to honor the Rooney Rule. The other one was Kellen Moore, who I found out they only interviewed for an hour and 45 minutes. They had a 3-hour limit. They used an hour and 45-minute Zoom to talk to Kellen Moore, and they never committed to talking to him ever again. And so it was clear that the Schottenheimer, they were moving in the direction of Schottenheimer from the very beginning. Although arguably it took him 8 days to get there from the time Jerry, sent out his press release that McCarthy was leaving the organization to them saying, hey, we've interviewed Brian Schottenheimer as a potential head coach. But yeah, I mean, it's not entirely his fault other than the process looks bad because you're the Dallas Cowboys. And as Jerry said so many times defending himself in this realm of hiring coaches, the Dallas Cowboys, because of who we are, we can have the best there is in coaching, and yet they almost never do. And in this case, it wasn't an exhaustive search. They didn't interview the best candidates.
No.
They didn't interview the best college guys because they didn't officially interview Deion. They only talked to him on the phone as their first call. They didn't interview Ben Johnson. They didn't interview Aaron Glenn. They didn't interview Liam Cohen. They didn't interview the Super Bowl winners like Mike Vrabel, or they interviewed Pete Carroll on the phone. I guess it wasn't an interview. They had a conversation with him. We thought it was mostly, to get a sense for Schottenheimer since they worked together for 3 years. But Stephen did say that they did discuss the job with Pete and his vision. But obviously they still decided ultimately to hire Schottenheimer, and Pete was being introduced today as a Raiders head coach.
Was Pete thinking about a reunion? If Schotty didn't get this job, was Pete going to bring him to the Raiders?
I don't know.
Las Vegas Raiders. I'd like to know where Schotty was going to have these interviews.
Where he was going to call plays.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Where he was going to go interview and then get to call plays. Yes.
Right. I don't know, but that's what they said. I have no reason to doubt them. It's entirely possible. I mean, he's been a play caller for other franchises, so it's fair to suggest that he might have had that opportunity somewhere else, and somebody else might have valued him in that way. He obviously, as he said, he and Dak work well together. They punch each other's buttons, as he said. When I asked about what's your vision for Dak Prescott at age 32 and coming off of 2 major injuries in 5 years, suggesting he's got very limited mobility. I mean, he talked about he's going to be an elite quarterback again, and we're going to win a championship with him. And if we're not going to do that, then why are we doing this?
I thought you should have said, what's the plan with the invalid sitting right behind me? Oh, man. The point I was making earlier, too, and I want to get to this clip. I think we have another one of Jerry. Ed, you hate the thought that Jerry does these things out of sentimental value. I mean, listen, his first 2 hires were people that were with him at the University of Arkansas, right? I mean, it was like Jimmy Johnson, and then he went again to one of his old buddies from Arkansas with Switzer. And in this case, he was just talking about being on the competition committee, knowing Schotty's mom, obviously Marty Schottenheimer, who we were talking about, who was an incredible coach, never won the big one, but that was the big deal, Ed. They said, that was what he told his mom when he called her. And all that stuff was nice.
Jerry's presence.
Yeah, Jerry's presence.
He said, we're going to win a Super Bowl, and the first one's going to be for Dad. And that really made Jerry emotional for obvious reasons. He's sitting up there with his son, right? His son's the executive vice president of the business of football that Jerry's running with the Cowboys organization. They're hand in hand in making these decisions together. And so the fact that Schottenheimer has that too, that quality of his father, following his father's footsteps, obviously, strikes Jerry in the heart.
All right, here is where Jerry seems to be struck in the heart and shows some emotion.
So I've seen it when I was a pup. I have a good background in the makeup of what a coach is. To think that you could make a decision in an interview and not have talked, if you didn't and hadn't ever communicated or had a visit, I wouldn't dare have had an interview unless I talked to many, many people.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'm sure he called up the whole world about Leslie Frazier and Saleh, and I mean, the very thought of me not doing the most meticulous. But Jerry, what about these guys that are supposedly, who just mentioned, Ed, Ben Johnson, Liam Cohen? What about these people that were like Aaron Glenn, who you should know? He's been here. He's got ties to the Cowboys. What about all these people who people seem to think are the next big thing? I mean, Aaron Glenn's about that age. Aaron Glenn's probably around late 40s, early 50s. And, he's arguably been better as an assistant than Schottenheimer, especially as of late, to not even reach out and want to visit with him. And again, the Deion thing never felt. I said it on whatever shows I would go on, including this podcast, Ed. I mean, you covered Deion as a player. It always felt like kind of a stunt. Like, let's talk about this, let's excite people, but we're never going to do this. And
let's deflect attention off me letting me not coming to an agreement with McCarthy to keep McCarthy, and let's put the focus on who our next coach is going to be and whether that should be Deion, and whether the stage is big enough for the two of us, and so forth and so on. But it didn't seem like there was anything ever really serious about that. Although, I was told, and we reported this, that Deion would have taken the job had it been offered, and that his people at Colorado, his advisors, his friendship circle, were telling him to pursue this job. Go get this job. But it never really seemed to materialize in any significant way.
And Michael was fanning the flames. Michael Irvin, the playmaker,
he's still upset about it.
He is, in the aftermath of it, I think he reacted by saying something along the lines of, "I'm afraid this is not going to be America's team anymore, the way this thing is going." And so that was put to Jerry in that little side deal we were doing today. And Jerry, as only he could, he kind of puffs up his chest a little bit, and he's like, "That's child's play. That's child's play." Compared to some of the criticism he's heard over the years. He said, "That's child's play." And then he made sure to say, "I have huge respect for Michael." Everybody knows that. And so, again, Jerry, for the most part, has very thick skin. I don't think he's that, again, he's trying to appease the fans. He hasn't with this hire. But the only time he's really shown thin skin recently, and Ed, I know there were times he was mad at you. You even, tweeted about that recently, but was the radio host over at the team flagship, the Fan. Yeah. When he was like, I could have y'all's jobs, or I could make a change. And that was a weird deal. That was kind of like, wait, what's going on with Jerry? He's threatening this guy's job on the air. That, to me, that spoke to kind of like how frustrating it was out there. But again, they've reacted by hiring Schotty, and as you and I have both pointed out, Ed, and I tried to do it as a sort of a joke, but I think it's true. It's like he literally, it's like a stamp of approval for Mike McCarthy. We love how this thing's going so much. Now we're kind of tired of Mike. We're going to move on from him, but we really want to do everything we were doing. We like, and so that came up today also on that side visit. Was he said something like, "There will be changes. There will be changes with this coach." To which, Ed, I asked what you should ask, and I was like, "Well, what are the changes?" And he says, there's going to be different things on defense. There's going to be different things on offense, and then he says practices will be different, but then he goes, "But these are adjustments, not dramatic changes. We will make some adjustments here." So anyway, it's very strange. They basically, it's like Mike McCarthy's era continues without Mike.
Right. And, I guess Schottenheimer sort of allowed us a glimpse of what he expects to do offensively. He talked about shifts and motions, and he's a big proponent of that. He mentioned the play action passing game, which I think is exactly the direction they need to go with Dak Prescott. If you look at the numbers, where he was as a rookie and where he is now in terms of the shotgun snaps have gone up to like 70% of the time he's in the shotgun. And given his limited mobility, he really needs to be under center with a strong run game. Like they should be modeling him after Jared Goff in Detroit, not Josh Allen, not Patrick Mahomes. He doesn't have that kind of mobility anymore, and it's too much of a risk that he's exposing himself to. The 2 times he suffered significant injuries in his career, the Cowboys lost 10 games in those years. He missed over half the games. And the years he stayed healthy, they won 12 games each year. That was Mike McCarthy's years. He went 6-10 because he lost Dak his first year. Then he went 12-5 3 years in a row when Dak was relatively healthy. Then he went 7-10 because he lost Dak again. And so getting Dak a proper supporting cast and using him in the right way is what's going to create success for Schottenheimer. And he made it sound like a play-action passing game is the direction he wants to go. And under center is like we've talked to Dak. He's fine with being in the shotgun, but he welcomes being under center and using like he's good enough to turn his back to the defense and find his receivers. I mean, he's going into his 10th year. There isn't anything he can't do that way. The things he can't do are the physical things he can't do anymore without substantial risk that they should no longer be willing to take.
Yeah, and Steven said something along the lines of, we think, and of course, Dak's sitting back there, so he's not going to say, well, we think we have a top 15 quarterback. He said, we think we have the best quarterback, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, if not the best. And as he said that, I'm thinking, well, he just saw one guy that's going to his seventh straight. He just went to his seventh straight AFC title game. He pretty much goes to the Super Bowl every year. I mean, he's actually on a better pace at his age than Tom Brady was. So to suggest, like, I mean, we can think right now in for terms of like playoff success and just overall what they're putting up. I mean, I think we could pretty quickly list 6 or 7 quarterbacks ahead of Dak. So to suggest he's like, I mean, again, hopefully he has a breakout year. The truth is, we kind of forget this, Ed. 2023, he was in MVP consideration, right? He was right up there.
In a second.
Yeah. Was Lamar, did Lamar win it or yeah?
He finished second to Lamar Jackson. He led the NFL in touchdown passes. He had 36 touchdown passes. First Cowboys quarterback to outright lead the NFL in the history of the franchise. So, yeah, he's capable of doing good things, but they've squandered their best playoff opportunities where they had advantages, and ultimately that's the reason Mike McCarthy's not here anymore. And it is a little surprising that they embrace his system and they want to carry it forward, but they want to do it with somebody he brought in as his assistant who was not calling plays, that they think there's real value in having Schottenheimer call the plays. So we'll see. But it was sort of ironic as you watch the games this weekend, and you mentioned it, Kellen Moore, Dan Quinn, Anthony Lynn, Joe Witt Jr., the defensive coordinator of Washington now, all these coaches, former Cowboys players who failed on the field, here not long ago. And Mike McCarthy brought those guys in, and one of his assistants is now getting the job here. 2 of them are better off someplace else. And McCarthy's out there trying to get the last head coaching job in the NFL with the New Orleans Saints. And guess who he has to beat out for it? Kellen Moore, the guy he said only wanted to call plays to run up the scoreboard and didn't care about protecting his defense and running the football.
The other guy he has to beat out, I think, must have the greatest personality ever. Like, how are you the offensive coordinator for the New York Giants? And people are like, yeah, we better take a look at this Kafka guy. I mean, that's pretty amazing that you can overcome that horrible team and somebody go, I think we got to look at Kafka. They win like 3 games a year over there. It is the Doomsday Podcast. Ed and I were on the scene at the Star today in Frisco. Lots of Cowboys players. I thought that was pretty good, Ed, that the quarterback. And I would say that the row where they cleaned me out, that was like 5 guys sitting there. And then standing back behind the media, probably another, 7 to 10 players. So that's not bad for middle of the off season to have like 15, 16 players show up. And I thought that was kind of cool that I think that showed his relationship with the players and the team that he
respect they have for him.
Yeah, and he named all of them. He's like, "There's Scooney." I like all the nicknames. He was
Jalen Colbert.
Yeah. I think he's a likable guy. But again, Campo is a great friend of ours, and he was a likable guy. But you're right, he went 3 straight 5-11s. And by the way, didn't Garrett have a 2 straight 8-8s? He
was 8-8 half the time.
They hired some guys that were consistent. They were consistent winners and losers. They were just always going 500. Okay, one last thing, Ed. The thought, and my other joke recently was like, this is genius. They can hire Schottenheimer and then hire his successor at the same time. Put Jason Witten on the staff, and then everybody would know he's the coach in waiting. And so maybe genius by Jerry. Well, today asked about Witten. Certainly Jerry respects him and has mentioned that he thinks he could be great, but he shot down any chances of Witten being on the staff. And I think part of that is, Ed, that's kind of, I think it would make Schottenheimer pretty uncomfortable, much like Wade Phillips felt when they gave the same money to Garrett.
Well, and they hired Garrett to an unknown position, and he was going to be on the staff of the next coach they hired, and the next coach they hired was Wade, and then they made him the offensive coordinator, play calling offensive coordinator, and everybody saw what happened. And in a short space of time, Wade Phillips was fired and Jason Garrett was promoted. And so everybody's wary of that situation with Witten. Now, I am a little surprised that Witten's not going to be a part of this, and so maybe he still will be. But maybe they're letting some time pass so they don't have to address it today, and they can address it later at a mini camp or whatever. And Witten's on the staff because Schottenheimer wanted him on the staff. Maybe. I don't know.
Like that,
we'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it won't happen. But hard to believe Jerry could have so much confidence in the guy and probably feel like, well, geez, as great as I think he would be, because he compares him to Dan Campbell all the time. But Dan Campbell was like an assistant for 11 years in the NFL before he got the Detroit head coaching job. So if you think of him in that way, like, you want to get him the opportunity, but you can't hire him now. You can't sell that. So he's got to get some experience somehow. So Jerry's got to get him involved as quickly as possible if he ever wants him to be the Cowboys head coach, which seems eventually that's what he desires.
I feel like it's a tad bit disrespectful, and he's been a member of this. He's been on the podcast, and I almost messed that up one time, as I recall. Now it's vaguely familiar to me. You being mad at me about something, but we won't get into that. But you pulled off a nice interview with Schotty just a couple of training camps ago, but it is kind of funny, Ed, that we've featured clips from Steven and Jerry and nothing from the new head coach.
He was good. He had some great stuff. Like, he certainly, what he said merited airtime that we're not giving him. But I think it was smart of Tad Carper, the public relations director of the Cowboys, to create a format where you hear from Schottenheimer first. He's going to make an opening statement, and then we'll open it to questions, because he knew there was a possibility we would sit there for an hour and a half and the new head coach would never speak.
True. You got to give him his moment.
That's what happens with Jerry and Steven and all the controversy that comes with covering this franchise.
Yes, and that's why Jerry had a big crowd afterwards, and then Steven had, smattering of people, including you, and then I don't know if anybody ever tried to run over to Brian. He was taking pictures of his family.
Yeah, he left, and then he went upstairs because he had coaches to interview.
Oh, last thing, Ed, I'm glad you brought that up. You've been all over the Eberflus news, and I didn't realize, apparently for these coordinator deals, you've got to do the Rooney Rule as well. And the Rooney Rule, sometimes some of these teams kind of, that's kind of a sham, but again, it was good intent, but the way they abuse it is kind of weird. But Ed, are you still, I guess that's pretty much, we know that's happening. And then what else about the staff? We're starting to hear more and more. In fact, I think there was an outside linebackers coach I saw that was coming in for an interview that popped up on my feed during the news conference. Anything, what's the latest on Eberflus?
Yeah, Eberflus, who was obviously here for 6 or 7 years on Jason Garrett's staff, first as the linebackers coach and then as like a passing game coordinator under Rod Marinelli. And he left here to go to the Colts and be the defensive coordinator for Josh McDaniels when they hired him as a head coach. And then he winds up getting stuck there. McDaniels reneged on the deal and never went and became the head coach. They hired Frank Reich. But, Matt Eberflus was so highly regarded here that to prevent him from leaving the organization when he did, they tried to offer him the defensive coordinator job, but out of loyalty to Rod Marinelli, who brought him here, he wouldn't take it. Decided he needed to go somewhere else and be a defensive coordinator. He couldn't put Rod Marinelli in that situation where he might lose his job to his mentor. And so he left the organization. He obviously became the head coach of the Chicago Bears, had a lot of issues, managing games. He won't have to do that here, but highly regarded defensive strategist, but you're putting Micah Parsons and all these players in a bad situation in that they are working for their third defensive coordinator in 3 years. Mike Zimmer's leaving the organization. I spoke to him yesterday, and he was, I think he expected, given what he had done for the Cowboys under 5 different head coaches, the difference he made last year as their defensive coordinator coming out of retirement, that he felt he deserved to be interviewed for this head coaching job, and wasn't. And so in all likelihood, he's not only not returning to Dallas, but he's probably going to retire.
All right. And we need to congratulate him. And I guess Mike, if he's got time on his hands, I think he did a podcast when he was out of football. Ed, he can always drop by our
And he
podcast.
sat with us out in the defensive meeting room when he came back last year. Yeah.
We had a good visit with him, but he has gotten engaged recently, and Ed is sometimes happens with gentlemen that are as charming as he is. They end up with much younger women, and that is the case here. But we do wish him well, and she seems very nice, and maybe we'll have her on the podcast as well. Zimmer and his new soon-to-be bride. Ed, any last thoughts? I think we hit a lot, and that was good. I mean, you had the foresight to, hey, let's wait. Let's do a big, robust thing. And, of course, the other night I was raring to go. I was ready to leave the restaurant where I was, the Tex-Mex. I mean, Ed, these things never happen, do they, in like a comfortable time, like where you're sitting by your computer, like, okay, good, I'm here to react to this
all day. I'm ready to go. Yeah. And I think it would have. I think we could have had an immediate reaction, but I think it's better to sort of take it all in, let people sit with it for a while. Let's go out and get some perspective from the people who made the decision, from Schottenheimer himself. Let's see what the circumstances are, the support from the players. And I think given all of that, you get a much clearer sense of why the Cowboys are doing what they are. And you can decide for yourself whether you support it or not. But ultimately, Schottenheimer should be judged on the job he does, not on what fans wanted or whether Jerry was right or wrong. We can say the process was a failure, but we can't rule out the possibility they hired the right guy. Let's see.
Yeah. I mean, what's he done wrong? He just accepted. He's kind of like, and somebody said, "Were you surprised?" I think he really wanted to go, "Yeah, I didn't think I was going to be the head coach of the Cowboys," but of course he didn't go that way. And he's well, he does a good job. He presents well. They all like win the news conference, except for Sirianni, and even Dan Campbell was mocked on his first news conference. I thought this guy hit it right down the middle, was about what you thought he would be, sounded fine, think he could command the room. There's no issue like, it's just a strange, as you said, strange process, and a strange, honestly, someone that they ended up with. But who knows? It could work. And then I wouldn't know what to do with Jerry if Jerry gets back to an NFC title game. I mean, it would just, can you imagine? He might just go straight to heaven. He was asked, by the way, in our little sidebar with him, do you plan to retire anytime soon? Knew he was kind of really kind of poking him. He just walked up and started being like, "You're 82. How could you even get out of bed in the morning?" I mean, he was asking questions like that. And Jerry asked if he was going to retire, said, "No, not at all," I think was his response. So, I mean, again, Ed, you and I would not be surprised if at 93 or 94, he's still doing these things. And somebody said, this could be his last hire. Give me a break. I mean, he could have 3 more hires.
He's going to outlive us all.
Oh, yeah. That's the way it is. What's the guy from Rolling Stones? He's kind of like
Rick Jagger?
No, Keith.
Keith Richards?
Yeah. They said the only people that survive like a nuclear attack are the cockroaches and Keith Richard. Yeah, that was the big saying. Okay, Ed, thank you. Good work.
Good stuff. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
I like a big close up of you. We got right. Oh, there you go. Where's he gone? Always good to have Ed from the home studio for Ed Werder and Rogue Media Network, the Z-Man, doing a great job jumping in today, doing all this stuff on the fly. I am Matt Mosley. That has been the Doomsday Podcast. Good night, everybody.
We are Rogue Media Sports.